In this video, I'm going to demonstrate how to implement a NV embedded system that includes 4 zones and 2 control panels. I've prepared the physical installation on this board for the purpose of the demo. This is Zone 1. Zone 2, Zone 3, and Zone 4. Control Panel 1 is controlling Zone 1, and Zone 3 and Control Panel 2 are controlling the remaining zones, Zone 2 and 4. The peripherals connected to Control Panel 1 are a weather station here, 2 indoor sensors connected to this panel, one in Zone 1 and the other in Zone 3. An outdoor temperature sensor connected to Indoor Sensor 1. Motor line 1 mounted in Zone 1. Motor line 2 mounted in Zone 3. A manual override switch also connected to Indoor Sensor 1, which operates Motor line 1. The peripherals connected to the Control Panel 2 are Indoor Sensor 1 in Zone 2 and Indoor Sensor 2 in Zone 4. Motor line 2 mounted in Zone 2. Motor line 3 mounted in Zone 3. And motor line 4 mounted in Zone 4. Therefore, in Zone 3, we have motor line 2 connected to Control Panel 1 and motor line 3 connected to Control Panel 2. I've powered the panels through this cable here, and I've also connected the cable from the building network here to Control Panel 2, and it's going through to Control Panel 1. I'm now going to configure Control Panel 1 to control Zone 1 and 3. First, I insert the NV embedded dongle in order to activate the NV embedded system. The dongle has a sticker with the Cloud ID number saved on it. The Cloud ID identifies the controller in WMA Cloud and enables the control panel to communicate with the WMA Cloud solution. When I insert the dongle into the panel, I get an activation code on the screen. The activation code changes every time I insert the dongle or every time I reset the control panel. In order to start the configuration, I need to log onto the panel. I do so with the default password 4321 for Level 3 access. First, I do the motor line configuration. I have 2 motor lines. I start with motor line 1 at S1X1. I want the panel to detect it, so I press Detect. I can test that the actuator is working by pressing the up and down buttons on the panel. This motor line is associated with motor group 1. Motor line 2 at S1X2. I ask the panel to detect the actuator. One actuator is found as expected. I want this motor line to be associated to motor group 3, not 2 as the default, because it's mounted in zone 3. I change the configuration to motor group 3. I can test that the actuator is working by pressing the up and down buttons on the panel as I did for the previous actuator. Now the two motor lines are configured. I enter the motor group configuration menu to configure the motor group. Motor group 1 is going to be associated with NV controller 1, and motor group 3 is going to be associated with NV controller 3 because its motor line is mounted in zone 3. Next, I configure the indoor sensors on the WSK link configuration menu. I need to find out which of the two buttons represents which of the indoor sensors I've installed in Zone 1 and Zone 3. To do this, I press the touch key on the sensor in Zone 1 and can see that a blue circle appears on button 1, meaning that button number 1 represents the indoor sensor mounted in Zone 1. I start the configuration of Sensor 1. First, I associate it with NV Controller 1. The next thing I want to configure is the outdoor temperature sensor that is connected to Indoor Sensor 1. I know that it's connected physically on input 3 of the sensor. I change the setting of Sensor Input 3 to degrees Celsius. I move down the list and I change the setting for the outdoor temperature from none to 3 because the outdoor temperature sensor is mounted on input 3 of the indoor sensor. Sensor 2 will be associated with NV Controller 3 controlling Zone 3. There's no peripheral installed on this sensor, so the configuration is done. NV Controller configuration. I know that I have two NV controllers that I want to be active. NV Controller 1. I activate it by changing the setting from No to Yes. In my demonstration, I keep this setting that NV Controller 1 is in Building 1, Part 1, Zone 1. I can decide if I want to control windows and what sensor data I'll be using for the control. In this case, I want to control the windows and use the temperature sensor, CO2 sensor, and humidity sensor. I don't have a PIR detector, so that's set to No. Further, I can change the temperature set point to the value I want. For this demonstration, I'll leave this and all other parameters with their default values. Moving to the configuration of NV Controller 3, first I activate it. This NV controller will control Building 1, Part 1 and Zone 3. I check that all the controls I want are active, the same as in the previous indoor sensor, and that PIR detector is set to No. In this demonstration, I'm not going to do a pulse scheduling. I don't have any mechanical ventilation or heating control. Therefore, I leave these sections of the configuration to their default setting. The next point in my configuration is local input. As local input, I have the rain sensor installed at S1, X10, 5. By default, the function input is set to safety and it is associated with all the motor groups. The default setting is fine. I go on to configure the weather station. I select Weather in the configuration menu. I change the sensor type from None to WLA340, which is the product I've used. I'm not using any field bus, so I can change the power setting to off. The AONet is the mechanism through which the two control panels communicate, and the communication is over the IP network that I've connected physically between the two control panels and to the building network. I enable the AONet and I assign AONet ID 1 to this control panel. This control panel will be the master. As you can see, the AONet ID did not change to 1 but to 2. In order to make it 1, I need to insert in the master IP address field the IP address of the controller itself. I need to go and check the IP address of control panel 1. I go to the View All Details menu and select Network, where I can read the IP address. I go back to the AONet setting and insert the IP address. Now we see that the AONet ID of the control panel changed to 1 as I wanted. I can select the AONet 1 M stands for master, and check the details and the status. Here we see the IP address, status 0 meaning no errors. There's no transmission yet because this control panel is the only one participating in the AONet network at the moment. In the Cloud menu, I can activate the communication between the control panel and WMA Cloud. I will not enable the communication for this demo. The device ID and the activation code that you can read on the dongle can also be found here. In the System menu under View All Details, I can set the time and the date. I can select the temperature unit to Celsius or Fahrenheit, and I can also give a name to the control panel. In order to be able to configure this control panel from a remote computer, I change the setting Enable Remote Control from No to Yes. The setting Enable Parameter Set from Network must be set to Yes as well. Now that I've enabled the AONet network, I can go back to the Indoor Sensor 1 that has the outdoor temperature sensor connected to it. I select to Send Outdoor Temperature to AONet and choose which control panels to send this information to. In this case, it will be to Control Panel 2. In the Weather menu, I have the option to send data to AONet and to also have this data sent to Control Panel 2. In the local input, I select All and go to Send Local Safety to AONet and select 2. The last thing to do is to link Motor Group 3, which controls the motor line in Zone 3, with Motor Group 3 on the Control Panel 2. To do this, I go to View All Details and select Motor Group. I select number 3. Then link to slave address and select ID 2 for Control Panel 2. In here, I select Motor Group 3 because this is the motor group that controls the actuator in Zone 3. Now I've made Motor Group 3 in Control Panel 1 the master of Motor Group 3 in Control Panel 2. I'll now do the configuration on Control Panel 2. First, I plug in the NV embedded dongle. Again, I receive the activation code. I log in with Level 3 credentials. I go into the View All Details menu and start with the motor line configuration. I have motor line 2 controlling the actuator in Zone 2. I get the control panel to detect it. It found one actuator as expected. I want it to be associated with motor group 2, which is the default setting. I test that the actuator is working by pressing the up and down buttons on the control panel. Next, motor line 3 at S2X1. I select Detect and wait for the panel to detect it. I want it to be associated to motor group 3, and we can see that it is. I test it in the same way as with the previous motor line. Now, motor line 4, S2X2. Detect. It's associated with motor group 4 as I want. I can also test this motor line in exactly the same way as I tested the rest of the motor lines. All motor lines on Control Panel 2 are configured. We move to the motor groups. Motor Group 2 I select to be controlled by NV Controller 2. Motor Group 3 is the slave of Motor Group 3 in Control Panel, so I'll not associate it with any NV controller. Motor Group 4 I associate with NV Controller 4. The WSK link. As before, I need to find out which sensors are represented by buttons 1 and 2 displayed here. I press one of the indoor sensors and I see the number 2 is marked with the blue circle. This is the sensor I have placed in Zone 2, so I associate it to NV Controller 2. The remaining button 1 represents the sensor in Zone 4, and I'll associate it with NV Controller 4. Next, I move to the NV Controller menu. I will activate NV Controller 2, which is set to control Building 1, Part 1 and Zone 2. The room is active. The window control is also active. We don't have a light control, so it's not active. The temperature sensor is also active, so are the CO2 and humidity sensors. The PIR is not active. Next, I will configure NV Controller 4. I activate it. I see that it's controlling Building 1, Part 1 and Zone 4 as I need it to. The room and the window control are active. The light is not. The temperature, CO2 and humidity sensors are active. but not the PIR detector. The next point in the menu that I'm going to configure for my demonstration is the network. Here I see that the DHCP is active and the IP address that it received. I select AONet, View and select All and activate the AONet network on this control panel. The ID I want to give, as mentioned before, is 2. I now insert the IP address of the master. This control panel is not a master. This is correct. The AONet is configured. We see now that there is communication going on between the two control panels. The Cloud menu. Here you can activate the cloud and get the device ID and activation code for the cloud that are also to be found on the NV dongle. Now that I've activated the AONet, I go back to motor group 3 and we see that the link from master address is ID1 motor group 3. This means that motor group 3 has a master in control panel 1 as we have configured it. To see that the system is configured correctly and will run, we can test it. I start with zone 1 and I touch the up key on sensor 1 and the actuator is opening. I can stop it with a short press on the manual override switch. Zone 2. I touch the up key on the other indoor sensor and the actuator of zone 2 is running. I stop it with a short touch. Zone 3. I do the same. Touch the up key on the indoor sensor and both actuators in zone 3 are opening. The one controlled by control panel 1 and the one controlled by control panel 2. I stop them with a short press on the manual override switch. The same test on zone 4. I touch the up key on the indoor sensor to open the actuator and short touch to stop. When I now activate the rain sensor, we see that all actuators are closing, meaning that the safety signal is being transmitted to the two control panels. This shows that the system is configured correctly. It will also begin to control the temperatures in the different zones according to the settings I've made.